As David's internal clock woke him, he felt the added weight on his chest. Carefully, he looked down at the head of Alaris and decided to simply watch for a few seconds. The beauty and serenity of her at rest were a stark contrast to her during her day. Her ears twitch every few seconds, as though whatever land her mind whisked her away to imparted on their space. David took a deep breath, his mind bringing the events of last night back. For good or ill, he was now, by her admission, her cousin. Raising his free hand, he reached for a loose strand of her hair and pulled it back behind her ear. She moaned at his touch, but didn't rise from her slumber. He felt deep at his core, a feeling he hadn't felt in a long time. He was at peace, not the peace of having finished a long day, or that of one when all that you must do had been done. No, this was the peace only felt when you were sure that no matter what came next, you could weather the storm. A quiet assurance of belonging, somewhere or to someone. He craned his neck and kissed her forehead. "David?" Alaris said after a hum. "What time is it?" Her eyes were still closed, but her ears and nose twitched every few microseconds. "Probably a bit after 6 o'clock, ship time," David said with confidence. "Then go back to sleep, unless you have a way to get food now," she said with a low growl. "Of course, my Zanno," resting his head back down. "Gavi, please wake us when the mass hall is open for breakfast," he said in a whisper towards his communicator. A soft beep let them know that the AI would do as told. He could feel the slow and steady rise and fall of her chest, the warmth of her breath. Their night had been more than David would have dreamed, and yet, like the sting of a bee, his conscience burned at him. He would have to tell her, he has to. Honesty is a core tenet of her people, and the idea of hiding the truth from her distressed his mind. He would have to before it is too late. She had to know, but not yet. Even if it was for his selfish desire, he wanted a bit more time with her. "Alaris," David whispered. "You know Kiga wants Cole to take part in her Killa Hinner?" "Yes, I told her she would have to have him trained," Alaris whispered back. "I have been informed by Kialan that you are seeing to his training. He said that Angela and Samantha cornered him with questions about it last night." "Do you have an issue with me training him? Kiga said that none of the males of your pack would do it," David stated softly. "Of course they wouldn't," Alaris remarked. "My daughter is the granddaughter of one of the most powerful clans in the Conclave." Alaris lifted her head to look into his eyes. "If I hadn't ordered them not to fight your people after that first encounter, I am sure Cole wouldn't be walking around." She paused. "A lot of them are still angry at the disrespect he showed Kiga, and while they wouldn't do anything for him, they will not help him either." Alaris brought her tail up and into her free arm, gently stroking it. "I think of anyone aboard. You know more than enough to teach him what he needs. I got the feeling that you know the ritual and what it entails." "I do," David said. "I have witnessed 2, one on Hinyaran, and the second was on Mustafar." David thought back to them. He was invited to witness because his platoon was fighting alongside a war host. The one on Mustafar. David remembered it well and had seen the outcome of tradition outweighing need. It was the Kilahanar of Lianis Malrakan. "Oh," Alaris said in a serene tone as she gently kissed David's cheek. "I heard about that one. Must have been a shock. That clan is a traditionalist one." She carefully stroked at his chest, doing all she could to soothe him. "I wouldn't allow such bloodshed. No one will lose their lives on this ship." "I know, my Zanno," David said. "I have known that you don't hold to such harsh traditions since our first meeting." He reached down and held his hand over her tail. "You are nicer than any Zandrade No I have ever met." She watches his hand for a second, before flicking her ear with an affirmation. "So if you are calling me your Zandno, does that mean I can trust you to protect my pack?" she said, as he tenderly stroked her tail, the calluses from his years of training not taking away from the soothing experience. "Of course," he said with a gentle kiss on her forehead, "as I would expect you to protect mine." He carefully stroked her tail. Her kind's tails are considered an important sign of their station, and the worst insult is to call another's tail anything short of perfect. Alaris's tail was a wonderful shade of silver, much like the rest of her fur, full-bodied and fluffy, with trinkets tenderly braided in. "For my Kusifane's pack, I would go to war," Alaris said as she shifted atop him before leaning in and passionately kissing him. Human anomaly, David. Night Huntress Alaris, Gavi said as it raised the light level. The captain would like a word with you both in his office. What time is it? David said as he carefully moved Alaris off of him, getting a little more than a tail swipe for his effort. It is currently 7:20, shipboard time, Gavi replied. The captain has requested both of your presence after reviewing the log of last evening. Did he ask you about us? David asked the AI pointedly. Yes, Gavi said back. David knew the rules and regulations. This wasn't much of an issue for officers to fraternize with each other. But as they were both liaison officers and mustn't show favoritism in the execution of their duties. So they had to play this right. He reached over to Alaris and carefully placed his hand on her shoulder. Alaris, the captain wants to talk with us. She swiped her tail at him again. I think it would be best if we set his mind at ease. She let out a small growl. I know the bed is nice and warm, but I don't want to have to take drastic measures. Oh? She said with eyes close and a playful tone in her voice. Well, I could yank on your tail for one, he said in his most assertive voice, only to be betrayed by his demeanor. Or poke at your nose. You wouldn't dare, Alaris growled at him. He reached out and poked her nose and held it there. In a flash, Alaris got to her feet and pounced at him, taking both of them flying into the wall opposite his bed, landing atop him with a snarling. You dare to be so bold, she says, one hand holding David down with the other raised over her head. David watched her for a second, calmly breathing and not so much as flinching. Yes, I do because I did what I set out to do, he said, before bursting out with fast movements. Grabbing at her hand that pinned him and raising his other arm into a guard, he lifted them both with little more than his abdomen. Alaris hissed as her free hand came down to slash at him, but he was ready, easily blocking the attack and catching her arm as she withdrew it. I got you out of bed and awake, he said through measured breaths, and I would never do anything that would cause you harm or pain. He pulled her in a bit for a kiss. Findra no kiss no, Alaris said as she pulled away from him. Why are you the one I choose as my Cusifane? Her posture slowly relaxed. Because I, as most people say, am a sweetheart, he said as he slowly released her. Besides, I think you rather enjoyed last night and this morning. He lifted her up so she could easily get to her feet. Alaris glanced about the room, something racing through her mind. David, can I use your communicator? David looked at her for a second, then around at his cabin. Yeah, he said, giving her the device. Maris, can you please connect me with Yayuli? Alaris said, and after a few seconds, her stance shifted a bit away from David. After a minute, the communicator beeped and a voice filtered through. Hello? Came a voice David didn't recognize. Yayuli, this is Alaris. I need you to bring me my uniform and a change of undergarments. Alaris tried to whisper. David took this as a cue to look back at Alaris and realized that she was wearing one of his undershirts. Realizing that she may want privacy to change, he hurried to finish changing. I'll wait outside for you, he said while buttoning up his jacket. Their joint walk to the captain's office did turn a few heads. Normally, liaison officers didn't intentionally walk next to each other unless something serious was happening somewhere. David could see the gears of the rumor mill started turning, but made nothing of it after all. The worst outcome is people may pay less attention to his team's activities. As they reached the captain's door, Alaris requested entrance, and the door slid open for them less than a second later, and they both walked in. Inside, seating behind the desk, was not the captain, but his daughter, the Duchess Chyalia Hirosil, her arms resting on her elbows and hands interlaced as she watched them enter. The captain was standing just a short bit behind her, his normally jovial demeanor gone, having been replaced by that of a stern and authoritarian man. David Alaris, the Duchess said with a measure of emphasis on each name, I have been informed by our captain that you two have spent the night together. Her gaze didn't waver as she spoke. You both know our rules and regulations, so I must, under my duty as the matriarch of this vessel, ask, what do you plan to do about this? David considered her words. The rules and regulations for the Expeditionary Corps are that officers can form a relationship so long as they don't let it affect their duties. For liaison officers, this also meant that they can't inadvertently cause strife between the races aboard. He and Alaris must choose to stay to gather or split now. David knew what he wanted. He wanted Alaris to be his and his alone, but did she feel the same? "Duchess, I am not sure how David feels about our connection," Alaris started, her eyes focused on the Duchess. "However, the night we just spent together has informed me of something I had forgotten, something I had actively denied myself for the past 12 alignments. I feel at peace next to him, and I wouldn't trade such comfort to fail at my duty." David had his answer from her, and he felt elated. "Duchess," David said with a raised volume that was unnecessary, "I am the Cusaphane of Alaris Hincarno, but I am also David Solomon, liaison officer to the human contingent. I am a man of reserved temperament and calculated reason. I will neither fail at my duties nor abandon my post beside her." He felt his hand digging into his palm and the gentle warmth of blood flowing. "On Earth there is an old tradition, one still invoked by some." David held up his blooded hand at the Duchess, her eyes widening in alarm. "I swear by the blood of my father and mother that I will execute my duties without failure, hesitation, or favoritism, be they with or against my Zanno." The room fell into silence for a time, save only the occasional sound of blood hitting the floor. The Duchess watched him, still stunned by his display. Alaris stared at him, shifting her ear every few seconds. The captain looked at David for a while before letting a loud squawk ring out. "My dear, I have seen many things in my time," the captain said gently, resting his hand on the Duchess's shoulder. "But the last time I saw a human give a blood oath was just before they joined into the Jackalow War." The captain turned back to David and then glanced at Alaris. "Do you know who gave that oath?" The Duchess was still staring at David's bloody hand, horrified at the bloodshed. "No, I don't," she muttered. "It was the human ambassador," the captain said intently. "He did it in front of the whole council and admirals over a live broadcast." "David?" The captain turned his attention back to David. "Do you know what he swore to do?" David pulled his hand back a bit and wrapped it in a handkerchief. "He said, 'I will not see another race destroyed just because this council is afraid. If the Jakalo wish to commit xenocide, then humanity will stand against them. I swear that until all of humanity is wiped from the galaxy, then the Zandraphane Conclave nor any other race has to be afraid of them.'" David recited. "My Duchess, what humanity did during the war was nothing short of a miracle despite their role in our community. If David Solomon has made a blood oath, then I trust him to keep to it," the captain said with a nod. "Yes, I remember that day now. I was horrified that the ambassador would hurt himself. But what he said stunned me more. Humans have such strong values for life," the Duchess said, and looked at David's hand for a second. "Very well, David and Alaris. I will trust you to uphold your duties before your relationship. You are dismissed." As they both exited the room, Alaris stopped David and pulled him into an alcove. "Let me see that," she said as she pulled his hand out of the pocket he had stuffed it into. "Findra, David, you didn't need to do that." She carefully peeled back the handkerchief and studied the wound. "You need to have this checked over." "I'll be fine," David said as she wrapped the handkerchief back and tied it hard, causing David to hiss at the pain. Alaris held his hand for a few seconds before closing it and kissing it. "Why did it have to be you?" she said before dragging him by the arm to the nearest Medi Center.